Nyana crouched in the corner of the mud kitchen, her fingers pressed against the cracked earth as the smell of roasted plantains filled the air. Her stepmother, Mama Keed, barked orders while her two stepsisters, Luma and Benny, giggled and tossed banana peels at her feet. Nyana said nothing. She had learned that words wasted on cruelty were better saved for dreams. Her only comfort was the small clay pot tucked into the shadows beside her. It was worn and chipped around the rim, with faded carvings that once told a story only her mother understood. Her mother had whispered to it every night before her passing, and now, sometimes, on nights when the moon was high and her stomach was hollow, Nyana swore she heard it whisper back. They didn't let her use the good pots. They said her touch would spoil the food, that her breath brought bitterness. So she cooked in her clay pot, using bruised yams and leftover spices swept from the corners of the table. But she poured care into every stir, singing softly to the pot, letting her tears mix with the broth when no one watched. "Why do you hum like that, bush girl?" Luma sneered one day, her lip curled. "Are you singing to your broken pot again? Maybe it will grow legs and carry you away." Nyana only smiled faintly and turned her face toward the fire. In truth, she was singing to the pot. Not a song she knew, but one that slipped from her lips like an old memory. Sometimes she wondered if the pot taught her these songs in her sleep. That evening, when the family had eaten and left the scraps for her on the ground as usual, Nyana gathered the bones, peels, and crusts into her pot. She added a few herbs she had hidden in her sash, herbs she'd learned from her mother long ago. She poured water from the gourd and whispered the song again. She closed the lid, left it by the fire, and fell asleep nearby. In the middle of the night, she woke to a scent so rich it made her dizzy. She lifted the lid of the pot, expecting rot or steam. Instead, she saw a stew of gold, thick, rich, glowing like the moon. It shimmered with the scent of wild thyme, forest peppers, and something older than she could name. She dipped her fingers in. One taste was enough to make her cry. Not from heat, not from spice, but from memory. It tasted like her mother's arms. Like laughter around a fire. Like a home she'd never known outside of dreams. The next morning, she brought the pot to the kitchen and tried to hide the glow, but Benny caught a whiff. "What's that smell? You trying to burn something again, dog?" Before Nyana could speak, Benny lifted the lid, and gasped. Mama Keed and Luma came running. They peered inside. At first, suspicion. Then confusion. Then greed. Mama Keed thrust a spoon into it and tasted. Her eyes widened. "Who made this?" she snapped. I did," Nyana said. "You?" Mama Keed's face twisted with disbelief. "With what? Sticks and dirt?" "Lies. I used the scraps. And the clay pot." Mama Keed's eyes darkened. "Bring me that recipe. Now." Nyana hesitated. She had no recipe. Only dreams. Mama Keed raised a hand. "If you don't tell me, I'll break that filthy thing and toss your bones with the pigs." Fear prickled her skin, but she whispered, "I only sing to it. It cooks by itself." They laughed at her. A deep, mocking laughter. Magic stew from songs? Foolish child. But the pot didn't stop. Every night, Nyana cooked scraps. Every morning there was food fit for a king. Rich soups. Spiced porridges. Roasted root vegetables that melted like honey. It was too good to hide. One day, a messenger from the queen's court arrived in Ulua. The queen, old and weary, had tasted every dish in the land but hungered still for something new. The villagers, whispering of Nyana's food, pointed the messenger to Mama Keed's house. When he arrived, Mama Keed shoved Nyana into the shadows and served the food herself, claiming it was her own. The queen's messenger took one bite, and closed his eyes in awe. "Tomorrow you will cook for the queen herself." Mama Keed beamed. "Of course." That night, she ordered Nyana to prepare the pot again. "Make it sing, you lying girl. Make it cook. Or you'll see your mother's grave before dawn." Nyana held the pot gently. "It only listens when it's fed with kindness." Mama Keed slapped her. "Then lie to it. Trick it. I don't care how." Tears stung her eyes as she stirred. The pot stayed cold. She tried again. And again. She sang. She cried. But the pot refused. It smoked black. The stew turned bitter. The next morning, Mama Keed nearly tore out her hair. "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything," Nyana whispered. "It's not me. It's the pot." Furious, Mama Keed hurled the pot outside. "We'll serve her something else. That stew from yesterday. Reheat it." But when the queen arrived, something strange happened. The queen stepped into the home with her guard, her presence gentle but commanding. Mama Keed bowed deeply. "Your Majesty, I have prepared a dish unlike any other." Nyana stood near the back, sweeping quietly, eyes downcast. The queen was served the day-old stew reheated. She took one bite and frowned. "This is not what I was told," she said. "Where is the girl?" Mama Kid blinked. "Girl? The one who sings to her pot," the queen said, voice sharp now. "Don't play with me. I was told of food made from nothing. Food that heals. Who cooked it?" Silence fell. Then Nyana, heart trembling, stepped forward. "I did, your majesty." Mama Kid stepped in front of her. "She's lying. She's a servant. Ill-trained. Dirty." The queen raised a hand. "Let her speak." Nyana bowed. "I only used what I was given. Scraps, ashes, peels. But the pot listens, when I treat it gently. When I sing." The queen's eyes softened. "Do you have the pot?" Nyana nodded. "It's cracked. And old. Fetch it." Nyana ran to the garden where it had been flung. It sat there, dirt-covered, one side chipped from impact. She brought it back and placed it on the table. "Cook for me," the queen said. Mama Kid laughed. "With what? We have no food left." Nyana nodded. She reached into the sweepings on the floor, broken yam skin, a sprig of thyme, a pinch of old salt, and placed them into the pot. She added a splash of water from the gourd and began to hum. The queen watched in silence. The fire crackled. The pot steamed. A smell rose, rich and wild. Not from ingredients but from something deeper. Magic older than memory. The queen took a spoonful. Her eyes closed. And then, tears. She wept. Not loudly. Not shamefully. But like someone who had forgotten the taste of joy. She stood. "This is the food I dreamed of as a child. The kind my grandmother made over the mountain fires." Mama Kid's face was pale. "You," said the queen, turning to Nyana. "You shall come to the palace. You will teach my cooks how to listen. How to treat ingredients with respect. And yourself, you will never eat from the floor again." Mama Kid tried to protest, but the queen silenced her with one look. "And you, who gave scraps to a child, who stole food meant for kings, you will eat what you served her." Mama Kid was made to sit on the floor and eat cold peelings from a broken plate. The stepsisters wailed as they scrubbed the kitchen. And Nyana, for the first time in her life, smiled. As she rode in the queen's carriage toward the palace, the clay pot beside her shimmered faintly in the light. She could almost hear her mother humming with the wind. The pot was never cleaned. Never polished. For its cracks were its story. The next morning was like any other. Nyana woke up before the first rooster call, swept the compound with her bare hands, and set about making breakfast from scraps the others had left the night before. The sky was still purple with the last traces of night, and the cold dew clung to her legs as she walked to the backyard herb patch. Her stepmother never watered it, believing weeds were not worth saving, but Nyana knew where wild mint crept, where the river salt left trails on the stones, and where forgotten seeds had grown into tender, bitter greens. She held her mother's clay pot close to her chest. Its lid was chipped, the handle long gone, but she felt its warmth against her palm. Sometimes, when the house was silent, the pot murmured in a voice softer than wind, guiding her fingers, telling her which herb to pick, which root to scrape and which leaf to crush between her fingers. That day she felt the pot hum with energy as though waiting for something to begin. The stew she made was nothing grand. A handful of greens, a sliver of yam, water drawn from the cleanest stream she could reach before sunrise, and a pinch of salt that she had carefully dried on a rock and scraped into a banana leaf. It was for herself, meant to be eaten in secret before anyone else rose. But as the fire crackled and the smell began to fill the smoky hut, her stepmother woke. "What is that stench?" the woman barked, stomping across the courtyard with one slipper flopping off her heel. Nyana froze. The stew was almost done. "Are you burning weeds again? Trying to poison us with your forest rubbish?" Before Nyana could speak, her stepsisters came out, yawning and giggling, their eyes puffy with sleep but their mouths ready to mock. "Look, she's talking to the pot again," one of them sneered. "Maybe it's her only friend. Or maybe she thinks it's her real mother," the other added, laughing. "Whispering ghost recipes from the grave." The stepmother lifted the pot's lid and took a sniff. Her face twisted with contempt. Then, with a loud spit on the ground, she tipped the pot slightly and let some stew fall onto the dirt beside the hearth. "This is what you deserve," she snapped. "If you want to eat, eat from the ground like the mutt you are." The stew soaked into the dust. Nyana stood motionless, her eyes stinging not from tears but from the rising smoke. The stepmother and sisters left laughing, calling her the clay dog as they went back inside. Nyana waited until they were gone. Then, quietly, she scooped up the remaining stew, sat by the edge of the compound wall where the trees began and ate in silence. She didn't cry. She never did anymore. The wind rustled the trees as if it knew her story. Birds circled overhead. Somewhere, far from the compound, a goat bleated and someone's drum echoed from a different celebration. Life went on. But that evening, the scent of her stew drifted farther than she thought. As the sun dipped low and turned the sky to honey and fire, a royal scout, riding back from inspecting a broken bridge, got lost in the forest paths. His horse tired, his throat dry and his belly empty, he dismounted and followed his nose to a clearing. There, near the outer edges of Ulua, he caught the faint scent of wild mint, roasted yam and river salt, a fragrance unlike anything he had ever tasted in the palace halls. He followed it. What he found wasn't a royal cook or a well-stocked kitchen, but a barefoot girl crouched near a pot, spooning up stew with a flat stone. He paused in the shadows, watching. The way she handled the food, it wasn't just cooking. It was reverence. And the smell. He had eaten food from palace chefs trained by scholars from 3 kingdoms. But this made his mouth water before the first bite. He stepped forward. Nyana gasped and stood quickly. "I'm sorry, I didn't steal anything. I swear," she cried. The scout raised a hand gently. "I'm not here to punish you," he said, his voice firm but kind. "I'm hungry. May I have a taste?" She blinked, unsure if this was some cruel trick. But the clay pot was humming, warm in her arms. She offered him the last scoop. He tasted it, eyes widening in disbelief. The flavors danced on his tongue, sharp from the mint, deep from the yam's softness, and wrapped in a salty tang that made his chest ache with memory, like a song he had forgotten from childhood. He licked his lips. Then he asked her to make it again. "I don't have the same herbs anymore," she said. "Use what you have," he said. "Anything." She did. And it happened again, this time with a different twist, something smoky and bitter and sweet. He closed his eyes after tasting it, and when he opened them he said nothing. Just bowed slightly, mounted his horse and rode off into the falling night. 2 days passed. Nyana thought perhaps it had been a dream. But on the 3rd morning the queen's taster arrived. Not in full regalia, not with trumpets or banners, but alone, on foot, in disguise. He had heard of a flavor that haunted the scout's tongue, one that no cook in the palace could replicate. The queen had grown curious, especially since her appetite had faded with the weight of endless war councils and exhausting peace talks. The taster asked no questions at first. He only watched. Nyana cooked again, this time with old okra seeds and roasted groundnuts. The scent rose thick and soft into the air. He tasted it, then asked her name. "Nyana," she replied. The taster nodded, eyes gleaming. "I must return to the queen." The stepmother, watching from the house, noticed the strange man's interest and grew suspicious. She cornered Nyana that night, demanded to know what she was hiding, slapped her when she refused to speak and tried to smash the clay pot. But when she raised her hand, the pot let out a sound, a low hum that vibrated through the hut, and the flame beneath the hearth flared tall, scaring her backward. The next morning, palace guards appeared. This time, not for punishment, but for invitation. The queen wished to meet the girl who had made the stew that changed the wind in her lungs. The girl who cooked like someone weaving history into steam. Nyana stood frozen as the guards waited. The stepmother stepped forward, all smiles and lies. "Yes, this is my daughter," she said. "She learned everything from me. I've raised her with great care." But the lead guard stopped her. "We asked for the girl, not her jailer." And before Nyana could even think to speak, the clay pot in her arms grew warm again, warmer than ever before, as if it too had been waiting for this moment. The guards parted the way. Nyana stepped forward. She did not wear shoes. She did not bow. But she carried the stew of her people, her pain, her strength. And the queen was waiting. The royal palace of Ulua stood like a carved mountain of gold and stone, grand and towering, but within its walls silence ruled. No musicians played in the courtyard. No dancers spun before the fountains. The queen, beloved and wise, lay in a bed surrounded by dried herbs and fading hope. Her eyes were dull with fever, her voice reduced to whispers. Doctors had come from far-off kingdoms. Sorcerers had chanted incantations. Priests burned offerings in sacred fire. Still her body refused to heal. Each day the queen grew thinner, her presence slipping like grains of sand through clenched fingers. In the early mornings, when the servants dared enter her room, they found untouched meals by her bedside. Roasted meats with golden skin, fruits glazed with honey, spiced breads warm from the oven, none of it passed her lips. Her tongue, once sharp with wisdom, now barely moved. "It all tastes like ash," she whispered one day, her breath fogging the silver mirror a servant held to her lips. "I want the food that smells like river wind and warm fire. Bring me that." The royal cook, offended, stormed from the chamber and refused to return. No one understood what the queen meant. What food smelled like wind? What fire could be tasted in a meal? Courtiers argued it was the fever speaking, that she was slipping into delusion. But the queen's eyes were steady when she made her strange request. "There is a meal I remember. A taste I cannot forget," she said. "Find it." At the back of the throne hall, unnoticed among the glittering robes and golden thrones, a scout stood still. He was a lean man with a long scar down his jaw and a torn sandal barely held together with twine. He had once wandered the forests near the village of Ulua, lost in a storm, starving for days. That night he had smelled something that reminded him of childhood, of the earth, of warmth, of something pure. Following the scent, he had stumbled upon a crumbling hut. And outside it, sitting alone by the fire, had been a girl with kind eyes and a small clay pot bubbling over the flames. He had asked her for a sip. She had hesitated, then handed him a cracked bowl filled with her simple stew. It had been wild herbs, some roots, river salt, and just enough grain to thicken the broth. But the taste had pierced him like a dream returning from the past. He had thanked her and left, but he had never forgotten. And now, hearing the queen's plea, something in him stirred. That evening, the scout approached the court scribe and made a request that startled the entire palace. "I believe I know the cook Her Majesty seeks," he said. "But she is no chef. She is a village girl, treated poorly, half-starved, and unknown." The court erupted with laughter. "You want to bring dirt into the queen's dining room?" one noble scoffed. "Shall we ask stray dogs to prepare the royal feast next?" But the queen, who had been lying silent and still, suddenly opened her eyes. Her voice, though faint, cut through the noise like thunder. "Bring her." The scout, with guards behind him and royal banners overhead, rode to Ulua the next morning. The villagers stared as they passed, muttering under their breath. No one believed the royal procession was for someone like Nyana. She was too poor, too plain, too invisible. When the scout dismounted in front of her stepmother's compound, her stepsisters laughed so hard one of them spilled her bowl of rice. "What do they want with her?" they sneered. "She smells like wood smoke and sweat." The scout bowed before Nyana as if she were already wearing silk and gold. "The queen has summoned you," he said. Nyana blinked, her clay pot clutched to her chest like a shield. Her stepmother tried to step forward to protest, but the guards blocked her path. "She's my servant," the woman yelled. "She cooks with scraps and weeds." But the scout's face was unreadable. "She cooks with soul." Nyana was given clean robes, though still plain compared to the court's lavish gowns. She refused to leave her clay pot behind, holding it carefully as the carriage rattled toward the capital. As they neared the palace, her heart pounded like war drums. She didn't know the rules of royalty. She had never seen a queen up close. She didn't even know if she'd be allowed to speak. The palace gates opened like the jaws of a giant beast, swallowing her into a world of marble, velvet, and silence. The queen lay on her bed, pale as river mist. Her silver crown looked too heavy for her head. But when Nyana entered, something shifted. The queen's eyes fluttered open. Her nose twitched. "That scent," she whispered. "The river wind." No one else smelled anything. But to the queen it was unmistakable. In the royal kitchen, Nyana was given gold-plated utensils, polished pans, and spices worth more than entire villages. But she shook her head. "I need my pot," she said. "And I need my way." The palace cook snarled. "You don't even know how to use an oven." But the queen's order had been clear. Let her cook what she knows. No interference. So Nyana worked in silence, barefoot on the palace tiles, stirring her pot with a carved wooden spoon her mother once made. She gathered wild herbs from the royal gardens, salt from the ceremonial stores, and water drawn from the palace well at dawn. When the stew was done, she did not serve it on silver platters. She asked for a simple clay bowl and placed it at the queen's bedside. The courtiers leaned forward in disgust. "It smells like trees," one whispered. "It smells like home," the queen replied. With trembling hands, the queen brought the bowl to her lips. One sip, and her shoulders relaxed. Another, and her eyes filled with tears. She ate slowly, reverently. Then she smiled. For the first time in weeks she smiled. "It's her," she whispered. "This is the taste I dreamed of." By nightfall the queen's fever broke. Her voice returned, soft but steady. She sat up without aid. The royal healers were baffled. "It must be magic," they murmured. "Not magic," the queen said, her voice still hoarse but clear. "Memory." Word spread through the palace like wildfire. The girl from Ulua. The cook with the clay pot. The queen's savior. Nobles who once spat at her name now whispered it like a charm. Her stepmother heard the news and fainted on the spot. Her stepsisters locked themselves in their rooms, ashamed to be recognized as her kin. But Nyana didn't change. She still wore her plain robes. She still stirred her pot the same way. When the queen asked what she wished in return, Nyana bowed low. "Only that my village never goes hungry again," she said. "And that you plant wild herbs in the palace garden." The queen laughed gently. "Done," she said. "And more." She ordered the palace kitchens be renamed in Nyana's honor. She appointed her keeper of the hearth, a royal position never before given to someone without noble blood. And in every feast that followed, one bowl of stew was placed before the queen, always steaming, always served in clay. The courtiers never understood the recipe. They tried to copy it, to mimic its flavor with imported spices and golden ladles. But they failed every time. Because it wasn't in the herbs. It wasn't in the salt. It was in the heart of the girl who had once eaten from the ground, and who now cooked for a queen. The morning light crept through the slits in the thatched roof of the food shed, painting gold lines across the dusty floor. Nyana had barely slept. Her heart still pounded from the shock of the royal summons, an elegant scroll bearing the queen's crest, sealed with deep purple wax. It had been handed to her by a palace rider himself, his horse steaming in the morning chill. The message was simple, "Come. Bring your hands. Bring your fire." Nyana's hands had trembled as she clutched the scroll, unsure if it was real. But reality came crashing down just an hour later. Her stepmother, Manwachi, had snatched the scroll from her fingers, her eyes gleaming, not with pride but with possession. "A dirty cook girl called by the queen?" she had hissed. "It is not you she met. It is my daughter she meant, your sister Lomi." Before Nyana could protest, strong hands dragged her into the food shed. The door slammed shut, iron bolts sealing her inside. Through the cracks, she could hear the bustle of preparation. Lomi trying on dresses that didn't belong to her, her giggles echoing as Manwachi taught her to mimic Nyana's voice. The deception was smooth, almost practiced, as though they'd been waiting for such a moment. Inside the shed, Nyana sat beside the shelves of spices and broken pans, surrounded by scent but denied her place. She touched the clay pot gently, tears stinging her eyes. "They've taken my name," she whispered to it. "Even my name." The pot, warm from her touch, gave a soft hum. Nyana blinked, startled. The sound grew louder, like breath filling a flute. It didn't speak words, not this time, but it shivered. And then it glowed. A gentle red pulse surged from its sides and heat bloomed in the air. The wooden shelves trembled. Dust danced. The iron bolt on the door snapped with a loud crack, flying across the room as though swatted by a great unseen hand. The door creaked open. Nyana stood, afraid and yet filled with wonder. The pot rolled forward, its little round belly glowing from within. She grabbed her worn shawl, the one her mother had embroidered long ago, and followed the pot outside. The village was quiet. The stepmother's house stood dark, the scent of stolen perfume wafting from its windows. Nyana didn't stop. The clay pot rolled to the edge of the forest. It paused as if waiting, then continued deeper into the trees. Nyana followed without hesitation. The night was thick with mist, but wherever the pot rolled, the path glowed faintly. Branches moved aside. Leaves whispered greetings. Owls blinked and watched her pass. Nyana walked barefoot, heart steady. She remembered her mother's lullaby, something about stars hiding in silence and fire sleeping in bones. The deeper they went, the more alive the forest felt. At one point, a thick-rooted tree blocked their path. The pot paused, then glowed brighter. The roots slowly shifted aside, opening a way. Time lost meaning. Whether minutes or hours passed, she didn't know. All she knew was that eventually, the trees gave way to a clearing, and the air turned sweet with the scent of royal spice oils and jasmine. A grand carriage stood waiting, golden lanterns hanging from its sides. 2 guards snapped to attention as Nyana approached. "Nyana of Ulua?" one asked, voice uncertain. She nodded. The man peered at her, then at the clay pot in her arms. "You're not the girl who arrived earlier," he muttered. "I am the one who cooked the food," she said calmly. The guard stared at her a moment longer, then nodded slowly. "Then it is you the queen waits for." He opened the carriage door. Nyana stepped inside, the pot in her lap, her breath caught somewhere between fear and awe. The horses moved forward, hooves silent on the forest path. She didn't look back. Behind her, Manwachi's house remained silent. Lomi, dressed in Nyana's finest, sat nervously in the queen's chamber, unable to recreate the taste that haunted the royal tongue. She stirred the stew wrong, burned the garlic, and forgot the river salt. The queen's lips did not move. Her face remained still, but her eyes narrowed. And far away, in a carriage lit by the stars and warmed by the glow of an enchanted clay pot, the real cook, the true daughter of Alua, traveled toward a fate not even her dreams could contain. The grand dining hall of the palace was shrouded in a thick silence, the walls adorned with rich tapestries depicting the kingdom's proudest victories. The queen, pale and frail, sat on her gilded throne, her delicate hands resting on the carved armrests. The room was crowded with court members, all waiting in a stillness that seemed unnatural, as though they were collectively holding their breath. Before the queen, a large silver bowl steamed gently. Her food taster had just taken a small portion of the stew and set it aside. The court held its collective gaze, expecting the queen's reaction. But the moment the first spoonful touched her lips, the color drained from the queen's face. Her eyes fluttered briefly, then narrowed in confusion. She took another bite, then a third, each one more hesitant than the last. The bitter taste filled her mouth, a harsh, metallic aftertaste lingered. Her face tightened in distaste. "This," she began, her voice trembling with frustration, "this is not what I asked for." The food taster, standing at a respectful distance, exchanged uncomfortable glances with the other courtiers. The queen's voice had been soft, but the words were sharp enough to send ripples of unease through the room. "Who prepared this?" she asked, but no one dared speak up. The queen leaned back in her chair, staring at the bowl in front of her, her stomach turning. Her mind wandered, seeking the taste that had eluded her, something from her dreams, a fleeting memory of a time when joy hadn't been so foreign to her. It was at that moment, as if the universe had bent to her despair, that the doors to the grand hall suddenly burst open. Nyana, covered in dirt and sweat, stood at the threshold. Her clothes were torn, her feet bare, but her hands gripped the clay pot tightly, the handle worn smooth from years of use. The pot, though seemingly unassuming, hummed faintly in the still air. Nyana's presence was stark against the opulence of the palace, a girl who did not belong to this world of silks and jewels. Yet, somehow, her very existence felt like an answer to a long-forgotten prayer. The room fell silent, the courtiers turning to look at her, whispers rising like a tide. Nyana made her way toward the queen, her eyes focused only on her. Her heart pounded in her chest, but there was no fear. She was no longer the low-born servant girl. She was the answer, the catalyst for the change she had only dreamed of. With a gentle movement, Nyana placed the clay pot on the table before the queen. The aroma that filled the room was unlike any the courtiers had ever known. It was as if the essence of the earth, the air, and the river had combined, forming a fragrance that carried with it a promise of something more. The queen looked up at Nyana, her eyes wide with wonder. She hadn't even realized how long she had been without true joy, without a taste that could ignite something deep within her. Without a word, Nyana took the ladle and served the queen a single spoonful. The court watched, breathless, as the queen lifted the spoon to her lips. She paused before tasting it as if she were bracing herself. The first taste seemed to freeze time. The bitterness from before vanished, replaced by something soft, comforting. A warmth spread across the queen's chest, and for the first time in months she smiled. Not just a fleeting grin, but a smile that reached her eyes, a smile that spoke of memory and peace. "This," the queen's voice trembled as she spoke, her eyes sparkling with a rare light. "This is what I dreamed of." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of an unspoken truth. The stew was more than just food. It was a memory come alive, a flavor that tied the queen back to something she had lost, perhaps something from her youth, from a time when she could taste joy. A time when the kingdom had not yet been filled with secrets and sorrow. The stew, made from wild herbs and river salt, was the connection to that lost joy. It was as though Nyana's very soul had poured into the bowl. Nyana stood there, her heart racing, waiting for the queen's next words. The room had fallen completely still, the courtiers unsure of how to react. The queen, still tasting the warmth of the stew, slowly set her spoon down. She looked at Nyana, her gaze filled with a deep gratitude and wonder. "Where did you learn to make this?" she asked softly, as if the answer would reveal something greater. Nyana hesitated for only a moment before replying, her voice steady but filled with a quiet strength. "From my mother," she said simply. She taught me how to cook with the land, with the heart. The queen's gaze softened, and in that moment, the walls of the royal palace seemed to disappear. There was no longer a low-born girl before her, but someone with the kind of grace and wisdom that had long been forgotten by the court. "You have brought me something that cannot be described by words," the queen whispered, her voice filled with awe. "It is as though you have brought the heart of the kingdom back to life." The courtiers, now silent witnesses to this intimate moment, finally began to understand. The queen had not just tasted food, she had tasted the truth of the land and of the girl before her. And in doing so, she had found a piece of herself that had long been buried beneath the crown and the weight of power. Nyana, though humble and quiet, had done what none of the royal chefs had managed to do. She had brought the queen back to life with a simple, honest taste. And from that moment on it was clear, Nyana was not just a servant. She was the bridge between the past and the future of the kingdom. The truth was in the taste, and now the queen knew it too. The great hall of the palace held its breath. Not a spoon clinked, not a whisper stirred. Nyana stood quietly by the queen's side, her clay pot steaming softly in the dim golden light. The scent of her stew, warm, herbaceous, with the earthy echo of riverbank roots, still lingered in the air like a song. Across the hall, the stepmother and her daughter trembled. Their hands were stained with deception, their mouths still bitter from trying to replicate a magic they never understood. The queen sat upright on her throne for the first time in weeks, her body still frail but her eyes now alive, sharpened by clarity and indignation. "Who made the stew?" the queen's voice rang out, low but unshakable. The stepmother's lips twitched. She tried to feign confusion, then indignation, but both melted under the weight of the court's gaze. I did," her daughter stammered. The queen's expression didn't change. "Then why does my soul not remember your hands?" There was a stir in the room. Nobles leaned in, their silks rustling, their jeweled fingers gripping goblets. The scout who had first tasted Nyana's food stood to the side, quiet but unwavering. He knew the truth, and so did the queen. "I asked for the one who stirred warmth into wind, who placed dreams inside the simplest spice. I asked for her," the queen said, turning slightly to Nyana. "So again I ask, who made the stew?" The stepmother's shoulders sank. Her eyes flicked from her daughter to the queen, then finally to the clay pot that now seemed to glow in protest. Her voice cracked as she tried to speak, but Nyana did not need to hear her speak to know. Shame had bloomed in her mouth like a bitter seed. "She did," the daughter finally muttered. "It was her. Nyana." Gasps rippled through the hall like wind over water. The queen looked down at the girl beside her, barefoot, dusty, her fingers raw from years of scrubbing, her dress patched in places where kindness had never lived. And yet she stood taller than any princess. The queen turned to her steward. "Bring the pot that was served first," she ordered. "Place it before them." 2 guards stepped forward and carefully carried the rejected pot, the one the stepmother's daughter had claimed as her own. They placed it at the feet of the liars, whose stomachs now churned with more than guilt. "Sit," the queen said. The stepmother looked horrified. "Your Majesty." "Yes, she thundered. They obeyed, trembling. The queen did not raise her voice again. Her next words were quiet, but each one struck like a bell through the court. "Let them eat as they made her eat." On the ground. The nobles held their breath. The daughter hesitated, her eyes wild with fear. The stepmother whimpered, her dignity unraveling like thread. But they did not move. The queen nodded to her guards. "Let the stew cool on the floor. If they will not eat, let their hunger speak of truth." No one dared protest. The queen, long silent, had returned with fire in her veins, and the fire spoke justice. As the stew was placed before them, neither the stepmother nor her daughter touched it. The daughter looked away in shame, the stepmother wiped a tear with the back of her hand, but even that act looked hollow. Nyana watched silently. There was no triumph in her heart, only a strange heaviness. She remembered eating from the dirt behind the kitchen, being laughed at when she reached for crumbs, having hot water flung at her feet when she moved too slowly. She remembered the nights when the clay pot whispered to her, telling her to keep going, telling her that something ancient watched from beyond the stars. The queen rose slowly and walked over to her. "You carry a gift, child," she said, reaching down and lifting Nyana's chin. "Not only in your hands, but in your heart. For even now you do not hate them. That is power." Nyana swallowed hard. "I don't know how to hate," she said softly. "It's not what my mother taught me." The queen nodded, understanding deeper than words could express. She turned to the court. "Let this be remembered," she declared. "That dignity does not wear silks. That power does not always speak loudly. and that those who bury others in shame may one day eat from the same ground they forced another to crawl upon. Cheers did not erupt. Instead, a reverent silence fell again, like the hush before a storm breaks or a prayer ends. The queen motioned to her steward. Have Nyana bathed and dressed in robes of blue and silver. Let her rest in the garden sweet. Tomorrow she will cook again, not for a queen but as one. Nyana gasped. Her clay pot hummed softly at her feet. And as she followed the steward out of the hall, past nobles who bowed and guards who saluted, she did not look back at her stepmother or stepsister. She had no need to, because the table had turned, and the floor had remembered everything. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the palace windows like golden syrup, wrapping the marble halls in warmth. But it wasn't the queen's chambers or the throne room that buzzed with life, it was the kitchen. Once a place of shouting, scalding oil, and sneers from those who wielded power through fear, the palace kitchen had changed overnight. At its center now stood Nyana, her clay pot resting in the place of honor where the queen's chef's cauldron used to sit. The walls, once streaked with smoke and tension, had been scrubbed until they gleamed. The air no longer smelled only of meat and spice, it held something else now. Oh. Again, Nyana said gently, kneeling beside a girl who couldn't have been older than 12. Not like this. She took the girl's hand and guided it through the basin of flour and herbs, showing her how to knead without force, how to listen to the rhythm of the dough. The girl's eyes lit up. No one had ever taught her anything with kindness before. She had come from the edge of the kingdom, rescued from a home where she had only ever been told to keep quiet and stay out of the way. But now she was being asked to create. Nyana stood and looked around her. Girls of all ages filled the space, some sweeping, some chopping, some stirring with furrowed brows and proud smiles. They had all been gathered under her wing by royal decree. The queen had given her full authority over the palace kitchens, not just to cook, but to teach. And teach she did. She did not hoard her recipes like secrets. Instead, she opened her clay pot and let the magic rise from it like stories being told aloud. She showed the girls how to grind ginger not just to awaken flavor but to soothe sore throats. How to crush leaves of lemon balm to calm fear. How to simmer yams with tamarind until the memory of bitterness turns sweet. These are not just ingredients, she said to them one afternoon. These are messages. Every meal is a letter to someone's spirit. So write carefully. They listened. Not just because they wanted to be good cooks, but because for the first time in their lives someone believed they could be. The kitchen itself seemed to breathe differently. Herbs were planted in every window, sprouting basil and lemongrass, mint and wild sorrel. Clay jars filled with ground turmeric, peppercorns, and dried mango lined the walls like treasures. Where insults had once been flung, now songs rose, soft, stirring lullabies and playful kitchen ditties. One girl composed a song for pounding yam, another made up verses about peeling plantains. Laughter echoed louder than ladles clanging. And Nyana? She moved through it all like a river, fluid, steady, nourishing everyone she touched. She wore her simple blue and silver robe with humility. Though the queen had offered her gold-threaded gowns, Nyana chose linen that didn't stain, and sandals that let her feel the floor. She needed to remain grounded, to remember. She never once looked down on the girls who didn't know how to measure spices or who fumbled with the firewood. She didn't mock mistakes. She shared her own. I once spilled an entire pot of groundnut stew, she told them with a grin. And do you know what I did? I cried for an hour, then made it again. That story traveled faster than any royal decree. And it planted something in the hearts of the girls. The knowledge that perfection was not the goal, presence was. The queen often visited in the afternoons. She didn't command attention like before. She came quietly, always pausing at the doorway to watch the girls. Sometimes she wept. Not out of sorrow, but out of the healing she could feel rising from the warmth of that kitchen. It was more powerful than any medicine her physicians had given her. One afternoon she approached Nyana while the stew simmered low. You could have kept it all to yourself, the queen said. The recipes, the skill, the reverence. Nyana smiled softly. What use is warmth if I'm the only one who feels it? The queen held her gaze, then nodded. You've built more than a kitchen here. You've built a home. And she was right. Word began to spread throughout the kingdom. People spoke of the palace kitchen not with hunger but with awe. Nobles who had once turned their noses up now sent their daughters to learn under Nyana. They offered gifts, gold, spices from faraway lands, jeweled aprons. But Nyana accepted only what could be shared with everyone. Even the stepmother and her daughter heard the news. But they didn't return, not out of banishment but shame. They had been given their freedom, but no one in the village ever forgot what they'd done. Their meals never tasted the same again no matter how much they stirred. Meanwhile in the palace the kitchen continued to bloom. Nyana introduced a new ritual. Every full moon the girls would prepare a feast together. Not for nobles or queens, but for themselves. They would eat barefoot, seated on woven mats, passing dishes around with laughter. They would share what they had learned, not just about food but about forgiveness, resilience and joy. And always at the center of the table sat the clay pot. It had survived years of fire, scorn and hunger. Now it boiled with the flavor of a future no one could take away. The day of the feast began not with trumpets or royal proclamations, but with the sound of pounding yam, laughter, and the scent of fresh-cut herbs in the air. Nyana rose with the sun. She tied her scarf tightly around her head, smoothed her apron, and walked into the kitchen where her girls were already waiting. No instructions were needed that morning. Everyone knew what today was. Today was for the forgotten. For weeks, Nyana had visited villages on the edge of the kingdom, places where the dirt roads cracked and the houses leaned with age. She had walked past traders who could barely sell enough to eat and stopped at homes where elders told stories to empty rooms because all their children had moved to the city. She invited them all. No titles required. No gold coins. Just come hungry. And come they did. They began arriving even before noon. A mother with 6 barefoot children. A man who limped from years of carrying too much weight and being paid too little. 2 old friends who hadn't spoken in years but sat beside each other in silence, drawn by the smell of something bigger than memory. The palace courtyard, usually reserved for nobles and parades, had been transformed. Mats were spread across the ground. Banana leaves were tied to pillars. Clay lanterns hung from trees, swaying gently in the breeze. In the center, a great fire pit crackled, and from it, the smell of stew rose like incense to the skies. Nyana had made it herself, along with her students. It was a stew that remembered its roots, thick with tubers, sweetened with palm oil, and spiced just enough to remind the tongue that it was alive. Each bowl would be served in clay, no silver, no gold, just earth in the shape of care. And then the queen arrived. She wore no crown. No robe of embroidered silk. She came with only one guard, wearing a simple white dress and sandals dusty from walking. Gasps rippled through the crowd, but she raised a hand not to silence them, but to greet them. "I come not as your queen today," she said gently, "but as your sister." She did not sit on the raised platform that had been prepared. Instead, she walked to a corner of the courtyard and knelt beside an elderly farmer who had once lost a crop to royal taxes. The farmer stared at her in disbelief, but she only smiled and handed him a bowl of stew. No words were exchanged, but something ancient was healed. Elsewhere, Nyana moved like a breeze, making sure no one's bowl was empty, no mat too crowded. A young girl tugged at her skirt. "Miss Nyana," she whispered, "why are we feeding everyone for free?" Nyana crouched down beside her. "Because someone once fed me when I had nothing," she replied. "And now we feed others so the chain never breaks." The girl nodded solemnly as if she understood something beyond her years. Around them the feast came alive. Widows who had lived in silence began to sing. Old men clapped hands on their knees, telling jokes long buried under the dust of disappointment. A boy beat rhythm on an empty bowl and 2 girls began to dance. Laughter rolled through the courtyard like thunder made of joy. And the stew, oh the stew. People said they had never tasted anything like it. That it warmed not just the belly but the chest. That it made them remember something they didn't even know they'd forgotten, the taste of being seen. One woman who had not spoken in years suddenly leaned forward and whispered, "I used to make this for my daughter." A tear rolled down her cheek, and she placed her hand on Nyana's arm. She died before she could eat it again. Nyana squeezed her hand gently. "Then let today's stew carry her name." Even the palace walls seemed to listen. Servants who had once ignored the poor began offering second helpings. A nobleman's daughter knelt beside a boy whose shirt was torn, laughing as they shared a roasted plantain. No one was above anyone today. Hunger had made them equal. Gratitude had made them kin. As dusk fell, the lanterns glowed amber and the fire turned to coals. Nyana stood up and raised a small clay bowl. "To those we forget," she said, voice steady but full, "and to those who remind us to remember." All around, others raised their bowls too. The queen, the children, the widows, the farmers, the maimed and the ignored. Even the wind seemed to still in honor. They drank, slowly, reverently. The stew was finished, but the warmth lingered long after. That night the kingdom changed. Not through war or laws, but through kindness passed hand to hand in bowls of stew. No history books recorded it, but the people remembered. Years later, children would whisper to each other, "Were you at the Feast of the Forgotten?" As if it were a legend. But it wasn't legend. It was real. And in the palace kitchen, long after the mats had been folded and the pots washed clean, Nyana sat quietly beside the clay pot that had started it all. It had been cracked and patched so many times. But still it held. Just like her. The rains came softly that morning, pattering against the palace eaves like 1,000 gentle taps from the sky. Nyana stood by the kitchen window, watching the gray mist drift in over the garden. She had just finished grinding fresh herbs when a knock came, not at the main gates but at the servant's door. Unusual. She wiped her hands and opened it. There stood a woman, thin, cloaked in faded cloth, hair streaked with gray and eyes sunk deep into a face lined with regret. Her feet were cracked as though she'd walked a great distance with no shoes. But Nyana would have known her face anywhere. Her stepmother. For a moment the world seemed to shrink to silence. The clang of spoons, the whispers of maids, the hum of the fire, everything faded. The woman looked down. "I heard, you cook here," she murmured. "I thought maybe I could have a bite. Just a little. Anything." Nyana's hands, still holding a linen cloth, trembled just slightly. Not from fear. From memory. This was the woman who had once thrown her scraps to the floor. Who had called her names instead of her own. Who had burned the only letter she had ever tried to write to her mother. This was the woman who had once told her, "You'll never be more than the dirt beneath my feet." But the woman standing here now looked nothing like that tower of cruelty. She looked hollow. Weathered. As though life had finally answered back with every harsh word she had once spoken. Nyana did not speak. She simply stepped aside. The woman shuffled in. She sat in the far corner of the kitchen, near the herbs. She avoided the eyes of the young girls who worked with Nyana. Girls who had once lived stories like hers, who now sliced onions with grace and stirred pots with laughter. Some paused, knives midair, watching the fragile figure in silence. Nyana said nothing to them. Only picked up a clay bowl. Into it she ladled a stew she had made that morning, simple but rich. Spiced with love and time. Soft yams, tender beans, roasted garden vegetables. She sprinkled crushed kola nut on top, a symbol of peace. She walked over and placed the bowl in front of the woman. The stepmother looked at it, then at Nyana. "What is this?" she asked warily, fingers twitching at the edge of the bowl. "Food," Nyana replied. The woman stared at it. "Why would you feed me?" Nyana met her gaze calmly. "Because I serve what I'd feed my mother." The words fell like a hush across the room. The woman blinked, as if slapped not with a hand but with mercy. She reached slowly for the spoon, but her hands trembled so violently she couldn't hold it. Her body began to shake with silent sobs. Tears rolled down her wrinkled cheeks, disappearing into the lines time had carved deep. "I was cruel to you," she whispered. "I don't deserve your kindness." "No," Nyana said softly. "You don't. But I give it anyway." The woman pressed her face into her palms. "I thought you'd poison me." "I could have," Nyana admitted. "But hate has fed too many mouths. Today I choose something else." The woman wept. Truly wept. Not the kind of crying one does for pity or guilt, but the kind that rises from somewhere long buried. The kind that only comes when a heart breaks open from the weight of its own cruelty. The kitchen girls turned away respectfully, pretending not to notice. But each one felt something shift in the air, something old and bitter loosening its grip. Eventually the stepmother lifted her spoon. Slowly. She took the first bite. And then she froze. Her eyes widened, not because the food was strange or rich, but because it tasted like nothing she'd ever eaten. It tasted like childhood could have been. Like forgiveness made real. She ate another spoonful. And another. And soon the tears ran freely down her face, falling into the bowl as she ate, each drop a silent apology. When she finished, she set the bowl down with reverence. She looked up at Nyana. "I have nothing left," she said. "No home. No name anyone says with love. I walked for days just to taste what I destroyed." Nyana crouched beside her. "Then start from here," she said. "Start with fullness, not emptiness." The woman lowered her head. "May I help? Wash pots, clean the floor?" Nyana didn't answer immediately. Then she nodded. "Everyone begins somewhere," she said. From that day on, the stepmother worked quietly in the background of the kitchen. She never asked for more food than was needed. She scrubbed harder than anyone, never once complaining. And sometimes, when Nyana passed her a small bowl of stew at dusk, she'd whisper, "Thank you," as though it were the first time she'd ever learned how to say it. In time she smiled again. Not with pride, but with peace. And in that kitchen, where old wounds once whispered between the clatter of pots, something beautiful began to heal. Not just in the stepmother, but in everyone who watched a dish become a door, and a meal become a mirror,